Let me ask you this question. Where, when, and with whom do you have a short fuse? I'll go first. A few weeks ago, Louise, my wife, said to me, I don't know anybody who is more impatient than you when you are driving. And I mean, how dare she say such a thing? And the thing that really irritated me, the thing that really irked me the most is I cannot think of a single person who is more impatient than me in a car. And I was like, this is a thing. I don't know what it is, but when I get in a car, I just get frustrated with the people in front of me. I get frustrated with the people who just take forever to pull out of a junction. I'm like, are you waiting for an invitation? You know, what's going on? I get frustrated with, those people who drive really slow and they sort of like, stop and then go and then they stop and I'm like, come on, we just move on. And Louise is like, but they probably don't know where they're going. Maybe they're looking for a house. And I'm like, I mean, do they not know I've got places to be? Do they not know I've got places to go? Some people are just so self-involved, aren't they? Just all they think about is themselves. But what about you? Where, when, and with whom do you have a short fuse? Is that not working? I thought it was, but there you go. We'll move to this one. Where, when, and with whom do you have a short fuse? See, again, do you get impatient with people who just get in your way? Whether it's physically, in a car is a bit different from walking. You don't really have road rage when you're walking, do you? If somebody's walking in front of you, do you get impatient with them? I mean, actually, I have to say, I did do that yesterday. We were coming back from Cardiff last night, and there was big traffic on the motorway. And I really needed the toilet. Really needed the toilet. And I'm like, jiggling around. And when the car moves, it's okay. But when it stops, why is that? Is it just me? I mean, you probably don't want to be thinking about this sort of stuff on a Sunday morning. But there you go. And we finally pulled into the service station. And I got out of the car and I legged it. And there were people like, for whatever reason, every single person in front of me sort of like would move. And they could understand where I was going, and they would step in my way, and I was getting irritated. Anyway, made it in time. It was fine. You'll be pleased to know. But what about you? Where are the places where you get irritated? Maybe it's in a coffee shop, and you go in and you just dash in just to order just your normal coffee, and there's somebody in front of you who orders their half-calf extra whip oat milk with a dash of soy latte with caramel syrup at precisely 85 degrees. And you're like, I only wanted a black Americano, and you're waiting for all of those sort of things. Where, when, and with whom do you have a short fuse? That's what we're exploring a little bit this morning, because we're carrying on this series called What Our World Needs Now. And, for the last few weeks, we've been sort of answering this question. We've been exploring this question. The whole point of this is, I'm sure many of us have an answer to this question. What our world needs now is for people to know where they're going and not drive slowly in front of me. But what's the answer that you would have for that question? What do you think our world needs now? We've all got our own theories, but if we're honest, if those things actually happened, is it the answer? Is that what our world needs now? The whole point of this series is what our world needs now is for Christians to be Christ-like. This is what we've been talking about for the last few weeks, is this concept of what our world needs now is for people who claim to believe in Jesus, to follow Jesus, to actually be like Jesus. And the thing about this is people who don't even believe that Jesus is who he claims to be, people who think Jesus is just a man, actually see the goodness in Jesus, see the positivity in Jesus. People can see the impact that Jesus has had on the world and culture and society. And actually, Jesus has changed the course of human history. He rewrote the book on how we should act, interact, and react with one another. And actually, people who are not even Jesus followers can see that actually, if we acted like Jesus, the world would be a better place. So just imagine the positive impact it would have on the world if all the people who claim to be followers of Jesus, I think that's about 1.5 billion people across the planet, if we all actually started living like Jesus and being like Jesus, it would have a massive impact. And that is what the world needs now. And, so we might be thinking, well, what does Christ-likeness look like? What does it mean to be like Jesus, to be Christ-like, not Christ-light? Well, that's what we've been exploring as we've been looking at these words that a guy called Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. And he says this: the fruit of the Spirit is love, it's joy, it's peace, it's patience,
patience, it's kindness, it's goodness, it's faithfulness, it's gentleness, and it's self-control. This is what Christ-likeness looks like. This is what Jesus is like. And Paul is saying, the fruit of the Spirit is the Spirit of God that was at work within Jesus that enabled Jesus to do all of those things that he did. And when the Spirit is at work within us, Jesus promised his followers a gift of his Spirit to help them, to comfort them, to support them, and to guide them. And when the Spirit is at work within us, the Spirit of God produces fruit within us. And this is the fruit that the Spirit of God produces in us: love, joy, peace, patience, and so on. And the way that we sort of get these things is not by working really hard. It's not by trying really hard. It's by allowing the Spirit to do his thing in us. It's by doing this that Paul goes on to say, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Jesus, we kicked off the series talking about something that Jesus talked about. John recorded, one of his friends recorded for us in chapter 15 of his gospel, John 15. And he says, remain in me or abide in me. When we stay close to Jesus, when we abide in him, when we remain in him, when we keep in step with the Spirit, that means when we follow the Spirit's prompting and guiding. If you're a Jesus follower, hopefully you understand what that means. That sense of God leading us or guiding us or challenging us or convicting us over something. And actually, we have an opportunity in those moments. Do we keep in step with him, or do we do our own thing? If you're still exploring faith, or you're curious about faith, or even skeptical about faith, I know that might sound strange or might sound a bit odd, but what Paul is saying is that when we do that, this fruit is produced within us. We become people who are more loving and more kind and more joyful, and we become people who are more patient. That's what we're looking at. And the astute among you may recognize that actually we're not following this in order. We've not gone love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. We've sort of jumped around a little bit. You've had to be patient for the patience talk. It's a pun, isn't it? And that's partly deliberately that we want to do that, because what can be so easy for us to do is, for those of us who've been around church for a long period of time, we can recite these words. We've memorized these words. But this isn't about just reciting what Paul wrote. It's about living it out. It's about allowing these words to be part of us. It's about allowing this Spirit to produce fruit in us. So we're not just saying, to be like Jesus is to be loving and joyful and patient. Actually, we're trying to live that out within our lives. And as we've gone throughout this series, we've sort of dived in to each of these words and explored, well, what do they mean? What did Paul mean by them? What was the cultural stuff going on back there? And we're going to do that with this word, patience, this morning. And I found it really helpful as we've gone through this series, just sort of to grapple a little bit with, the original meaning of some of those words. So we've sort of dived into a bit of ancient language as we've done some of these things, because often in our language, what we mean by that word is a little bit different from what Paul, who wrote this in the first place, meant by it, or his first listeners or readers meant by it. And our understanding of patience, is that the same as Paul's understanding of patience when he wrote this letter? And he says, the fruit of the Spirit is about patience. And as you read the New Testament, if you were to read it in its original language, in Greek it was mainly written, you'll see that there's two words for patience, two words, Greek words, that are often translated into English as patience. So the first one is this one. Should we just say this all out together? It says ipomone. Ipomone. I only know that because it's written on the wall at the back. So there you go. And this is sort of like waiting. This is the patience of patiently waiting. This ipomone is what I do not do when I'm in traffic. So that sort of patience that we talk about there. And it sort of literally means sort of like endurance. It means steadfastness. So ipomone means to don't give up, to keep going, to persevere when things are difficult or things are tough. Ipomone is that patience that, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to be patient in this. I'm not going to give up. But in this letter that Paul's writing, when we come across this word patience, he's not using ipomone. He's using a different word. He's using this word. Should we say that together? Macrothemia, which is, ipomone is about that sort of waiting patiently for something. Macrothemia is about being patient in our relationships. It's about being patient with the people around us. It's about about how do we respond to those people around us. So if ipomone is don't give up, macrothemia is don't blow up. And a more literal translation of this word that perhaps you read when you read through the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians is these words: long-suffering or forbearance. That's, a more literal meaning of that word. So this is not about, being patient in a queue. It's not about being patient in the supermarket queue as it's taking ages. It's about being patient with the person at the front of the queue who's just taking ages to pack their bags or is paying with loads of coupons and like with pennies and all of those sort of things. Macrothemia is the sort of patience that parents of young kids exhibit to their children when they've asked them to, tidy their room or eat their dinner or put their shoes on or basically do anything. And you're like, oh my word, why does it take so long for you to do anything? I just want to get out of the house. That's macrothemia right there. Macrothemia is the patience that's shown to a colleague who, is asked you, how do you do that thing again that you've shown me 1,000 times? You've asked me this. I know you've shown me this and I've forgotten and you keep helping me. Macrothemia is that patience where you patiently help that person and you explain to that person again. Macrothemia, in our context, we would often describe somebody who exhibits good macrothemia as somebody with a long fuse. And what we mean by that is somebody who doesn't blow up quickly. We mean somebody who's not quick to react to the situations or the circumstances around them. Somebody with a long fuse doesn't blow up when somebody pushes their buttons. Somebody with a long fuse doesn't blow up when people actually get in their way and make their life more difficult. Somebody with a long fuse, someone with macrothemia, doesn't blow up when people actually more than get in their way, go out of their way to get in your way. That's a little bit different. Sometimes people just make your life a little bit more difficult. That's one thing. But sometimes people actually seem to go out of their way to make your life more difficult. Macrothemia is about not blowing up in those situations. But more than that, it's not blowing up when people have offended you or hurt you. But more than that, it's not blowing up when people have offended or hurt your kids. This is what Paul is talking about. The fruit of the Spirit, the macrothemia, is about having this long fuse. So in those difficult and those testing situations, actually we can stay calm, we can stay measured. We don't just respond or go off the handle. We don't blow up. And I often think this is a strange definition. We talk about this in our culture and our society as part of our society. They've got a long fuse or they've got a short fuse. People with a short fuse, as soon as something happens, they blow up. But having a long fuse is only as good as the fuse being long enough for the fuse to go out. See, if you have a long fuse and all you're doing is delaying that negative response, you're delaying that explosion, well, that's not good for you, and it's certainly not good for them, because actually people who do that, who suppress or stew on things, eventually blow up. And that, when you stew on things, you blow up later on, and that explosion is far bigger. Some people have a short fuse and they just spew it out, and it's constantly that stuff. That explosion is actually often far less than people with a long fuse who just suppress and stew and simmer away, and bitterness and all of those sort of things comes in. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about suppressing emotions. We're not talking about stewing on things. We're not talking about somebody doing something and us not reacting to them, but actually going over there and gossiping and complaining about them and just allowing this stuff to harbor in our heart. A long fuse is only good if it's long enough for that fuse to go out. So actually, instead of a long fuse, perhaps we should just say a wet fuse. But that sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? It sounds a bit weird. So maybe we'll just stick with the long fuse analogy. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, Chris, I can get on board with, patience and, not blowing up in these situations. But why should I bother to be patient with people who are not patient with me? Why should I be bothered to be patient with the people who go out of their way to get in my way? Well, instead of asking this question, who am I being patient with? Answer this one instead. For who am I being patient? Now, for whose benefit is my patience? Now, of course, the person I'm being patient with benefits from it, but is that why I'm doing it? Am I exercising patience purely because it's good for the person in front of me? Well, let's be honest. No, that is not my motivation to do that. I'm far more selfish and self-centered than that. You know, there are two people for whom I am being patient. Firstly, me. Being patient is good with us. We're going to come back to that later. But secondly, another motivation for me to be patient is Jesus. You know, this series is all about followers of Jesus being like Jesus. You know, that's what our world needs now. And in this context of what we're talking about, what our world needs now is for people who follow Jesus to be patient like Jesus is patient, to exercise his patience. You know, and so for me as a follower of Jesus, Jesus is my motivation to even consider being patient to the people in front of me. Jesus is my motivation to even consider being patient to those people who go out of their way to get in my way. And, you know, having said that, it doesn't mean this is easy. You know, Jesus is my inspiration, he's my source of my patience. You know, that patience comes from the Spirit of God that's at work within us. But that still doesn't mean that this is an easy thing to do, because if we were to do a quick survey of all of us, I'm sure many of us struggle with being patient with all people, especially those people who are not patient with us. So let's take a look at something else that this guy called Paul wrote. And this time it's to the Jesus followers in a place called Thessalonica. And he says this: "And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive, encourage the disheartened, help the weak, and be patient with everyone." So these words come towards the end of this letter. And Paul says, you know, we urge you. Who's the we? Well, that's him. That's a guy called Timothy. It's a guy called Silas. And the context of this letter in Acts 17, that's a book that Luke wrote that we can find in the New Testament. We see about all the stuff that Paul did. And in Acts 17, we read about Paul's visit to Thessalonica. And what Paul would do is he would go any place for the first time is he would preach in the synagogues. You know, that was his custom. He would reason with the Jews about Jesus being the Messiah and sort of showing them that Jesus was the fulfillment of the Jewish traditions and the Jewish culture and the Jewish law. And what happened is many of the Jewish people saw that and actually started becoming Jesus followers. They joined this new movement called the Way, as it was referred to back there. But more than that, actually a bunch of Greeks as well. So non-Jews or Gentiles is often referred to in the Bible. People who didn't have that background. They heard about Jesus and were intrigued, and you know, something happened within them, and they started following Jesus as well. So this sort of popularity spread around Paul and Timothy and Silas, but also this popularity around Jesus. And there were some Jewish people who struggled with that, people who were part of the synagogues and all of those sort of things. So they started to try and make trouble for Paul and Silas and Timothy, and they rounded up a big mob who came and basically caused a riot in the town. And then they went to the city officials and said, look, these people have come in and they're declaring another God. You know, this is under Roman rule, and Caesar is the only God. And they're saying that these people are saying there's another God, that this Jesus is God, that Jesus is king as well. And they sort of enticed like this mob against them. They enticed the city officials against them, and then it all kicked off. And so Paul and Timothy and Silas had to flee for their safety, leaving these new Christians behind on their own. And Paul's obviously worried about them because, you know, not only are these new Christians going to face opposition from their neighbors, from their Greek neighbors, because, you know, they've started this new thing and they're following, not following the Greek customs, or they're not following Caesar, but also they're going to face opposition from their family because they're sort of appear to be moving away or stepping away from their Jewish traditions. I mean, they weren't. They were just completing those things. So they're in a difficult situation. So when they can, Paul sends Timothy back to them just to encourage them and ask Timothy, you know, let me know how they're getting on. So Timothy goes and sees them, and he sends word to Paul about how this new church in Thessalonica is going. And Paul was expecting them to be struggling and it for being difficult. But what he hears back from Timothy really encourages him, because they're not struggling. In fact, they're thriving. In the face of this real severe opposition and persecution, the church is flourishing. And Paul is so uplifted and encouraged by the word from Timothy that the church is doing well, that he writes this letter to them. Actually, we think this is the first letter that Paul wrote, that then goes on to form the New Testament. Actually, so these events spark something that would bless billions of people from here. Paul writes loads of other letters to lots of other churches. So that gives you a bunch of context about what is going on here. And what Paul is saying right at the end of this letter is, I want you to be patient with everyone. And in this letter, there's like three different instructions to three different types of people about what does patience look like. And the whole point about that is patience is different depending on the situation, isn't it? We're all different. We all have different experiences. And actually, for us to show patience to one another means that we're able to adapt our approach depending on who it is that we're being patient with and what's going on around us. So let's really quickly just jump into them. So Paul says, I want you to warn those who are idle and disruptive. Who are the idle and disruptive people? No, don't near there. No nudging, he's talking to you. No, don't be doing that. But Paul says, look, patience is about warning the people who are idle and disruptive. He doesn't say ignore them, but he also doesn't say I want you to condemn them or I want you to rebuke them. He says I want you to warn them. What does that mean? Well, it means about giving advice. It's about giving counsel. It's about caring for that person enough to warn them about their behavior, to sort of highlight it to them in a way that is gentle, in a way that is considerate, in a way that actually is consistent with the rest of the fruit of the Spirit that we're exploring throughout this series. And in this context, the people who are idle and disruptive are probably the people who thought, well, Jesus is coming back immediately, so there's no point actually doing all this work and doing all that stuff because Jesus is going to return today or tomorrow or next week. So they actually stopped doing the stuff that they should do. And Paul's saying, well, you have to warn them. You have to point them in the right direction. This is about firm but loving correction. This is about correction that seeks restoration, not about condemnation. So being patient is about actually gently and compassionately warning people who are idle and disruptive. The second situation is encourage the disheartened. And again, in this context of this letter, this is probably the people who are just struggling because their neighbors are against them. Their family are now against them because of their faith. And they're losing their courage. And Paul is asking these people who are discouraged to be patient, to have that ipomone patience, to keep going in those situations. And I love the word encourage, because to encourage literally means that we put courage in people, that we enable people to feel that they can keep going, that they can do this. To discourage is to take courage away from people, to tell people they can't do this. But when we encourage people, we actually give them the courage, we give them the power to keep going. And we do that not with empty platitudes, not by just saying everything will be okay and everything happens for a reason, all that sort of stuff. We encourage the disheartened by being there with them, coming alongside them, showing compassion, showing understanding, but more than that, by pointing to Jesus. That's what Paul is saying here. Remind these people about, what they're doing and what they're about and where their focus is on. Point people back to Jesus and allow them to draw that courage that comes only from him. So, we want to warn the idle and the disruptive. We want to encourage the disheartened, and we want to also help the weak. And, weak applies to lots of different situations. That could be people who are morally weak or spiritually weak or even physically weak. And again, in those situations, how we show patience differs depending on what's going on there. And Paul says, I want you to help the weak. And again, literally what he says there, I want you to hold fast to them. This is about sort of sustained, supportive relationships. It's about being there for people, coming alongside people, journeying people. This is not about one-off momentary, assistance. I'll drop in and I'll do that, and then I'll withdraw. To be patient with the weak is about just being there and giving time, giving energy, giving focus. And that takes time. It takes energy. It takes focus. That's what patience, that's what macrothemia is all about. And then Paul goes on to say, make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other and for everyone else. Make sure nobody pays back wrong for wrong. Patience is not about doing to others what they do to us. It's actually about showing compassion and understanding. It's a dedication to do good for each other, for everyone. So that's doing good for the people who love us and we love, but it's also doing good for the people who don't love us. It's doing good for the people who get in our way and go out of their way to get in our way. And that sounds really difficult, doesn't it? It sounds really like that's hard work. That's why he says, we have to strive towards that. Sometimes we think as Jesus followers that actually it's not about striving, but there are parts where it is striving, it is difficult, it is hard work. This is not about doing it in our own strength. Paul's not saying that because of the stuff that he said before. This is about leaning into God and leaning into the fruit of the Spirit that's at work, or the Spirit that's at work within us that produces fruit. But we still have stuff to do, and we have to work at doing that. That's what patience, that's what macrothemia looks like and requires from us. And again, you're probably still sitting there, because I am thinking to myself, why? Why should I do this? Why should I bother? Especially if they don't show patience to me, why should I show patience to them? Well, let's go back to these questions again. It's not about who am I being patient with, it's about for who am I being patient. And the thing about patience, as I alluded to earlier, is it's good for us. Patience is good for us. It's actually a proven scientific fact. There's tons of studies and research that has shown that people who exercise interpersonal patience, people who show macrothemia, actually are better off. And let me just show you a few of those ways. People who have patience have better mental health. They feel less stress. They experience less levels of depression and higher levels of positive emotions because they exhibit this macrothemia. So you have better mental health. But also you have better physical health. One study actually showed that people who extend patience to others, especially through helping other people, had significantly lower blood pressure. It was comparable to starting a new exercise routine. So when we show patience, not only is our mental health better, but our physical health is better. But also we have better relationships. Patience fosters empathy, it fosters understanding. These are crucial tools for building strong, lasting relationships. Patient people are nicer, they're better. Actually, people want to be around them. And also, patient people have better resilience. They're less affected by the stressful moments of life. The science is in. Being patient is good for us. And that shouldn't come as a surprise for us. What we're doing is articulating something that Jesus actually demonstrated and modeled for us. The followers of Jesus have known for thousands of years that actually when we follow Jesus, when we live like him, our lives are better. Jesus makes life better, and he makes us better at life. So we're patient with other people because it's good for us. But there's other motivation, and for me, the other motivation beyond that is Jesus. Actually, what I see in Jesus and the patience that he shows to me, how patient is he with me? I mess up all the time. I get things wrong all the time. I don't extend patience to other people. And he doesn't condemn me. He doesn't kick me. He waits patiently for me. Jesus goes at my pace. I'm so inspired and so moved by that it challenges me and it encourages me and it motivates me to want to be like him, because I realize that I will be better if I'm like him, but also the world will be better if we are like him. The fruit of the Spirit is patience. It's what's produced in us when we stay close to Jesus. We're going to get the band back on stage as we sort of just wrap this time up together. And, there's a challenge with this because, the fruit of the Spirit, this is what is produced automatically in us. That actually we could be saying that all we need to do is just abide in Jesus and remain in him and walk in step with the Spirit, and then we automatically become people who are patient. We automatically become people who are loving and gentle and kind and good and all those things that we've explored and will explore throughout the rest of this series. And that is true, but the challenge there is an understanding of what does it mean to walk in step with the Spirit? What does it mean to abide in Jesus? Because this is something that, whilst it does happen automatically, it also requires something on our behalf. You know, God is patient with us. Jesus is patient with us. And he's not going to just come in and just railroad over us and change us without our will. Actually, he wants to work in us. He wants to work through us. And actually, he wants to help us become people who exhibit patience. And what that means is actually when we're in those situations where life is difficult and life is challenging and there's people, we're facing opposition, and especially those situations that push your buttons, those situations where you tend to have a short fuse and you might be tempted to blow up. It requires us to choose to lean into patience, to choose the way of patience, that macrothemia. And we don't conjure that up from ourselves. We don't actually have that patience, okay, I'll just choose and I do that. That's where we lean into the Spirit of God. That's where we lean into Jesus. But it still requires us to consciously and consistently and constantly say, I am going to choose to follow Jesus. I'm going to choose to be like Jesus in this situation. I'm going to choose to be patient like him. So where is that going to be difficult for you this week? With whom is that going to be difficult for you this week? Just allow your mind to mentally go through those places, those environments you're going to be in, those people you're going to be with. Where are the places? Who are the people who are going to push your buttons? Who are the people who are not going to do this for you? Who are the people who are going to go out of their way to get in your way? This is where the rubber really hits the road. What does it look like for you to be a follower of Jesus in that situation? And you might not be a follower of Jesus. You might be here this morning because you're curious about faith, or you're skeptical about faith, or somebody just invited you for lunch and said, come to church with me as well. You know, you're under no compulsion to live like this, but that doesn't mean you can't live like this. What impact would it have on your world, on your relationships, on your workplace, on your family, on your street, on your school, on your sports club, on your neighborhood, on those places you exist, if you were the person who started with patience, who exhibited this patience, who chose to be patient, especially when people weren't being patient with you? See, the thing about the fruit of the Spirit, all of these characteristics, is they're contagious. Ripples of grace flow out, and when we drop that pebble into the pond and in that situation, and we choose patience instead of blowing up, and people see that, it's inspiring, it's encouraging, but it's also challenging, and actually it helps people to choose to lean into that as well. So wherever those places where you need to choose patience, to move at the pace of the people around you, just as Jesus moves at your pace. Let me invite you to stand to your feet if you're able. And we've done this thing throughout this series. I know it's a little bit odd and it sounds a bit like the Borg as we recite something out together, but we've got a prayer which we're just going to bring on the screen. I really would love to encourage you to take out a phone and take a photo of this. And at the start of each day, just pray this prayer. Before you go into a meeting or before you get in the car, maybe that's certainly what I need to do, is to pray this prayer. When I go into that place where life is difficult, just pray this prayer. We're going to say it out loud together. I know that's awkward. You don't have to do that, but I invite you to do that with me. Let's repeat it 3 times because, again, that's good to do. So let's embrace the awkwardness and choose the way of patience. Say this out loud with me. Heavenly Father, give me the patience I need to move at the pace of those around me. Say it again. Heavenly Father, give me the patience I need to move at the pace of those around me. And this last time, say it like you really mean it. Heavenly Father, give me the patience I need to move at the pace of those around me. Amen.